to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other.
I'd like to welcome everybody tonight to the Paper Tigers Book Club event for Wednesday, August 29th, 2012, Capital Area District Library in Lansing, Michigan. This book club, as it's been since September of 2011, is sponsored by the X Foundation of Lansing, Michigan. My name is Doug Warren, one of the co-directors of the X Foundation. The foundation, just a little background, through various projects and events like this one, seeks to independently research, resurrect, revive, and radiate our heroes, stories, issues, descriptions, and prescriptions as chose by us, for us. And our overall mission is to receive and administer funds for the perpetuation of the memory, life lessons, and legacy of Malcolm X, as well as other civil rights and human rights leaders throughout our history. The Paper Tigers Book Club, as I said, is a project of the X Foundation. The purpose of this book club and lecture series, as it's kind of morphed into, is multiplex. We seek to provide the audience as well as the facility and a medium by which targeted information and knowledge can be centrally received and brought out to the community. And primarily we define that community as minority, but obviously, as you see, I'm not technically a minority. But we wish to embrace all members of the community at large who share our goal of empowerment through enlightenment. And we want to ignite, encourage, and support both young and old to independently read, research, and speak out publicly. And also, through this medium, we hope to teach others through constructive criticism and analyzation to organize and publicize their own research discoveries, as well as ask questions and bring up thoughts as both a speaker and a listener. And at the Lansing City Council here locally, as well as other governmental units, a speaker is often limited to just a few minutes a week to speak on a particular topic. It's very constrained, as it is in many educational institutions such as Michigan State University and Lansing Community College. The speaker's topics and audience in those facilities are restricted to its own defined geography, self-interest, and membership of administrators, staff, and students. And as we all know, information received through the mainstream media is very simply nowadays corporatized, propagandized, and often imperialized to further empower those already in power. And talk radio, as we know in most instances, is nothing but hate radio under the guise of free speech. And the internet often, unfortunately, is such a maze of data, misinformation, and disinformation that it leads us often to more confusion and a false sense of influence than we often actually have. But in contrast, we, with the Paper Tigers Book Club and X Foundation, hope to allow community members to speak, listen, dialogue, discourse, and debate. And the internet, it will be face-to-face with local people at different levels of expertise, or even those lacking expertise. Quickly, for more information, you can visit our website, malcolmxlansing.org, and you can also email us at our email address, malcolmxlansing@gmail.com. Now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker for this evening. The topic of discussion, the title of the presentation is going to be Between Ballots and Bullets, Malcolm X, Black Rhetoric, and Democratic Civil Engagement in the Global Hip-Hop Boom. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. Did I get that? Okay. And the presenter this evening is Dr. Austin Dorell Jackson, Assistant Professor of Writing, Rhetoric, and African American Studies, and the Director of My Brother's Keeper Program, at Michigan State University. So please welcome Dr. Austin Jackson.
Prepared more my presentation is more, it consists more of like discussion prompts. We're a small group, so what I hope to do is talk a little bit, share some things that hopefully will generate a meaningful conversation, hopefully a useful conversation. In other words, I'm not going to lecture, I'm just going to share a couple thoughts with you guys, and hopefully we can talk and engage, hopefully, in some collective problem solving based on the crisis that we're engaged in right now. And when I say crisis, as many, I'm probably preaching to the choir, of course, that I'm not being hyperbolic. It is a crisis of democracy, and that's the reason why I thought it'd be interesting to revisit Malcolm X's Ballot or Ballots speech. Of course, many of us are familiar with that speech. When he talked about the ballot, Malcolm said that he's essentially talking about freedom. And I'll revisit that in a minute. But when it comes to talking about the crisis of democracy, like right here in Michigan, certainly we do have a crisis. We have a crisis of democracy when we see self-conscious efforts to keep blacks from exercising their democratic rights, the right to the vote, to elect their own school boards, to control the resources in their community, overt efforts to keep blacks, well, majority black cities like Detroit and Benton Harbor, from electing their own government officials through these emergency financial manager laws. And even now, as we speak, the right wing is engaging in efforts right now to make it more difficult for people to vote, typically targeting people that look like me and you, many of you in the audience. And that's a crisis. So this room should be filled right now, in my opinion. Everyone should be screaming, mad, angered, upset, and revved up and ready to go. So one of the things that I hope that can come out of this conversation is that how can we get more people, particularly the people that this is going to affect the most, engaging in these kinds of conversations instead of just simply talking to the choir. And I really like Doug's comments about how in academia, where I work at, knowledge is sort of siloed off. We don't get a chance to talk to, like real people. So it's an honor and pleasure, to be here for whatever it's worth to talk, to the Malcolm X Foundation. So I've called this, short presentation, Ballots or Bullets. And right now, I'm currently in the process of writing, a book chapter for an anthology on Malcolm X, which really should include some of you all, because you know more than a lot of academics, that tries to look at the meaning of like rap and hip hop, and particularly the figure of Malcolm X in the context of the Arab Spring. One of the things that many, as you were watching the footage, many of you probably noticed is that a lot of the revolutionary fighters in Libya, in Egypt, folks who thought they were fighting for their rights or whatever, they had their hats on backwards, they were rocking images of Malcolm X, they had their sag on as this man here or whatever. So I thought that was kind of curious that, and when you listen to the culture and art that came out of these uprisings in the Middle East and North Africa, oftentimes it was rap music and hip hop culture that served as a sort of soundtrack, for what they considered to be their revolutions, So on NPR, one old Arab man, elderly Arab man, called some of these scenes here as the revolution of men with sagging pants. So I started thinking about how, we have a lot of commentary about rap music and hip hop culture in this country. A lot of it is not really considered very positive or whatever. But I thought it really interesting that all the way in the Middle East and North Africa, they were indexing the culture of young men, and women, sagging their pants, rapping and indexing that, and then remixing it and making it meaningful in the context of their popular struggles. So it got me thinking about, well, why don't we have that here? How come we haven't had a revolution of men with saggy pants right here in Lansing or Detroit or Benton Harbor? Because certainly we're facing the same kind of crisis conditions that many of them were facing when they were fighting for their rights or what have you. In terms of the Occupy Wall Street movement right here in the United States. Well, I'll just let this clip kind of speak on its own, because what we see with the Arab Spring movement were connections between what was going on in the Arab Spring and what was going on with the Occupy Wall Street movement, and some of these young hip-hop artists trying to make that connection through their music. So I'm going to play a little bit of that. We're kind of old in here. Anybody hip-hop heads? I'm 39, yeah. 39 years young. Okay, all right, well, hopefully this won't offend anybody, hopefully. Approach with an open mind.
And they laugh at you. I heard him say the revolution won't be televised. Al Jazeera people wrong. Twitter has them paralyzed. 80 million strong and ain't no longer gonna be terrorized. Organized, mobilized, vocalized. On the side of truth, for materials living proof that it's a matter of time for the chickens on the roof. Boy, I think you lit the roof. And it slowly ignited the fire within every people to fight it. It's the hand, this the new moon shines bright. It's the man's wound was his mask, it's the man rights. In the cell room, it's a disunity, communally removed in the tomb was thriving. We're making headway, checking down the dictators, getting rid of dead weight. Opening the floodgates like the streets agenda. But while it could go, through however and we've been empowered to speak, and though the future is uncertain, and at least it isn't bleak. When our children can be raised not in a cage, but on a peak, the inheritance of Mother Earth of me. Freedom isn't given by oppressors, it's demanded by oppressors. Freedom love is freedom fighters, free to gather and protest. So that God-given right for the freedom of the press. We know freedom is the answer. The only question is, who's next?
It's very bad. You might get the bread. I have food, I have everything. Me and my children, I'm dying today.
Time to push, we ain't gonna get up. Time to fight.
I'll pause it there. But the simple point here is that these were American rappers. These were American rappers that were really tied to the Occupy Wall Street movement. Some of them were Muslim. If you like Jay-Z, Rockefeller Records, or whatever, there's a rapper named Freeway. And Freeway is, basically, he was born Muslim, but then he sort of embraced Islam, fully, fairly recently. And he's one of the contributors to this. So a lot of the images that we see here, we can see on the streets in the Occupy movement, and the significance here is that members of the hip-hop community, are constantly releasing songs and images and video in solidarity with with their movements over there. Okay. The reason why I chose Ballots or Bullets, I was intentionally trying to be provocative because right now, this is kind of like where we're at right now. I'm not advocating violence, but violence might be the result if we see another Florida. And we can see right now that Republicans are self-consciously engaged in this action right now through what they're trying to pass, not just in Michigan and Ohio and Florida, what have you. And I think that's sort of apropos to what Malcolm's talking about here when he's talking about that we can't just rely on the old methods of just marching and singing in the face of crisis, what have you. We might have to consider some other type of action. Right now, there's, I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there was a small victory of putting the emergency manager law up on a referendum, Right. Well, in my perspective, and you can disagree with me, here's the problem. What happens when, the majority of voters in the state of Michigan were like, well, all these cities are predominantly black cities that this impacts, and, basically black people can't run anything anyway. They are corrupt. So what's wrong with the emergency management law? In other words, there are limits to putting civil rights on a referendum, and we have to move beyond that. So again, I'm not advocating violence, but it's something that we have to consider in the context of massive violence going on all over the country, mass shootings, for no reason. What's going to happen when there is actually a reason, when people are turned away left and right? Something that we have to consider. Yes, sir.
To your point, if we had a referendum on ending slavery or establishing civil rights, ending Jim Crow, et cetera, we'd still be in bondage.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Precisely. Exactly. So there are limits, and I think that Malcolm spent a lot of his most of his message in the latter years, basically concerned with just that. We have to be talking about what it means to be a human being, not just simply a citizen, because blacks aren't considered citizens. We're not considered full citizens in the first place. So that's not the place to start, for our rights. So, but Moving a little bit forward, I feel kind of funny, showing some of these images, but I just want, the point here is that Malcolm X's image pervades rap music, hip hop culture. So even though we might think the older generations might consider rap and hip hop as a bunch of like nonsense, it's really important to remember, and maybe I'm the same age as some of you guys, growing up back in the 80s, that the image of Malcolm X was being indexed by a lot of rap and hip hop. During the crack epidemic, during Reagan era recession, or what have you. And it's important to recognize that these young people that are engaged in rap and hip hop, that are participating in the culture, aren't just talking about bitches and hoes, please excuse me, but rather there are deep political messages. I've always been interested in is why has Malcolm X exerted such a powerful influence on the global hip hop generation, whether it be here in the United States or in North Africa or the Middle East, and why is it significant in the new millennium? I have a sort of provocative thesis that when rappers are in fact indexing people like Malcolm, they're trying to engage in what I'll just call, what Terry Eagleton calls structural theorizing. Oppressed groups and classes, women, the proletariat, ethnic minorities, and colonized people, to engage in structural theorizing so they can be in effective possession of themselves and grasp something of their own material location within a wider system, realizing their highly specific interest in emancipation. So when they're engaging in bringing in Malcolm X and looking at what Malcolm X is saying and inserting that into rap lyrics, what they're trying to do is understand that it's not just me alone that's suffering this as an individual, but rather there are these larger structures of power that are at work. And looking to the past, looking to figures like Malcolm, to get some kind of meaningful analysis to make sense of what's going on right now. And my mentor at Michigan State, her name is Geneva Smitherman, she defines the rapper as a postmodern African griot who aims to speak the truth of not only past conditions, but to testify to today's struggle in the African diaspora to overcome racism and oppression. When Doug wrote the title, he used the word Uma, and that's Arabic for community. The idea that we're all sisters and brothers, not just limited to Muslims, I would dare to say, but all of us that worship one God, and those of us that are united in a common struggle, constitutes this community, this Ummah. And when Lupe Fiasco, is rapping, he oftentimes indexes the Quran. So I think it's important to recognize, once again, that when it comes to some of the repression of civil liberties and stuff like that, a lot of people, that whether it be African American, Muslim, Christian, are indexing these traditions in order to make their voices heard. So one of the things that I said at the very beginning, I didn't want to have a coherent lecture. I was more interested in just simply offering a few provocative points, just so we can engage in some meaningful discussion, some discussion towards, at least leading to some kind of hope that we can do something. Because right now, the right wing is steamrolling legislation in all these states right now, including our own, that are essentially anti-democratic. I would even say fascist, if you will. So the question that we have to confront as a community is what is it that we're going to actually do? What's alarming is that I haven't seen any sort of meaningful action against it, other than getting this, issue put on a ballot, which is going to fail, So that's essentially, what I would like to just simply offer you and maybe get into some discussion.
Did you see the interview that Lupe Fiasco had in the New York Times? I believe it was this past Sunday, maybe the week before. They interviewed him about his new album.
Oh, okay.
And he was abrupt and aggravated and a little bit rude to the interviewer. And as the dialogue went on, it became apparent that he was aggravated by the reception of this album for superficial reasons. People didn't like the video. Pete Rock, who you know, I'm sure, didn't like the production values. Mm-hmm. Some people didn't like the beats he used. But no one was getting into the substance of the message in this album, which was attempted to be like a Marvin Gaye, what's going on, type of music endeavor, where he was going from the first song all the way through the last with a coherent message that was trying to move people call a new paradigm. And he kept saying, people are missing the point, people are missing the point. Now, I haven't heard that album yet, but it interested me that the record company and whoever distributes his music has not made an effort to help him get the word out about what this piece of music is all about. Right. It's similar to what Marvin Gaye encountered when he first came up with the idea of what's going on, right? It was lost. If it wasn't for just brilliant music, the message would have been lost.
Right, yeah, absolutely. Now, I didn't see the interview, but I've heard him express that frustration in other venues. As a response, one of the things that Lupe did is he released a song and a video called Dumb It Down.
They talked about that.
Right, you know, in the sense that he is trying to be politically engaged and intelligent in his lyrics, and you know, even a lot of people don't really understand it. A lot of members of the hip-hop community who are white and suburban, they buy his music, but they just kind of like, you know, nod their head like, oh, that's cool, and totally miss the underlying political messages that are there. You know, African-American members of the hip-hop community, you know, it was like, man, I don't know what you're talking about. You know, you're talking all this complex stuff, you know. So in essence, dumb it down, you know, make it simple. So Lupe Fiasco is in a tough situation. I can certainly understand his situation. He's an artist. And I also think we got to be careful that while I presented a few artists here that are using music in order to get their message heard, and I've tried to like sort of underscore that they're not just simply reacting to just their own individual experiences, but rather they're reading somehow or another. They're getting Malcolm. They're, you know, basically globally aware. You know, they're reading the Quran. So they're engaged in forms of literacy that oftentimes are not even acknowledged as literacy, you know, in official school settings. So I wanted to just kind of bring that out, that they're not just simply protesting because they don't like what's going on to them, but they're going back and trying to bring forward, you know, these traditions that are oftentimes, this intellectual tradition, radical traditions that are often seldom taught in schools itself. But at the same time, I also don't want to overly romanticize them, because we should be looking to artists to lead any sort of like revolution for the most part. They're griots for the most part. They're the tellers, you know. But the question is, how is this useful? You know, how can we tap into this? You know, and actually do something meaningful. You know, with these young people that are at risk. All of us are at risk, but especially this next generation that we call the hip hop generation. So yeah, wonderful point. Yes, sir.
Now that I'm 62 years old, I remember being a young teenager and having incredible love and respect, admiration for Malcolm X, a man who symbolized, represented, expressed my anger and hatred as a result of my personal experiences of racism, segregation, prejudice, and exploitation. So when I saw posters with him saying, by whatever means necessary, and when I saw as a kid him holding, it's not AK-47, or he invented a gun that looked like AK-47, as if he's ready to do combat, I felt an incredible surge of pride, energy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But since then I've learned that we have to distinguish between revolution and rebellion. And there's the parallel between revolution and a gun, to me, is misleading. Because you can have a rebellion with guns and just replicate the same thing that you just fought and become a part of. Whereas if you have revolution, you're talking about change. You're talking about change in ideology and family relationships and community relationships and so forth and so forth. Where a gun has limited value, ultimately has some value, yes. And I'm not calling for nonviolence, that's everybody's personal choice, okay? But I am saying this, is that to think that we need arms to have a revolution and to fight white supremacy is very misleading. We need to take control of our history, reinterpret our history as we should ourselves, use that to give us direction, and recreate our sense of identity in our eyes for our benefit. We are white supremacists, and we're not even white.
You know, again, I feel kind of silly even saying this, because I know I'm preaching to the choir. Because we all know that revolutions follow certain processes, right? You know, that you need to raise the class consciousness, and I dare say racial consciousness of people. In other words, you have to make sure that people start off with the proper analysis so they can start moving towards, the proper solution. So gun isn't necessarily the solution. Sometimes guns are necessary, as Malcolm X has said, quite eloquently. When you think about revolution, what revolution has not been bloody? The Russian Revolution was bloody. The French Revolution was bloody. And what was more bloody than the American Revolution? So, but he also taught, as like I said, everyone knows, is that the revolution had to start within ourselves, raising our consciousness. That's why his revolutionary activity consisted of mostly speaking and raising people's consciousness, so they in turn can begin to think about, their situations in much more complex ways. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I also think that what goes on in Michigan State, is kind of complex. What I mean by complex is that certainly you have the teaching of white supremacy at Michigan State, but I also teach at Michigan State. And that's why I was late today. I teach Marxism, teach black feminism, teach critical race theory, and I teach them as theories so students can take these tools, these conceptual tools, and look at the world a little bit differently, understand power structures, because they can't challenge power structures, as you've already said, unless they have the proper analysis and understanding why this is that Detroit's public school system isn't jacked up, because it's just a bunch of, corrupt black officials, but rather, it was taken over. This process started back in, the 1990s with Engler and private contractors wanted to get a piece of the pie. And the Detroit school system had a budgetary surplus at the same time that it was declared that the schools were actually failing. And they looted it. They looted it like they were Mugabe or somebody. They looted it, for the benefit of private contractors. That's what's going on right now. And they pretty much got their way. So anyway, I say all that just to say that, I totally agree with you. We have to start by raising people's consciousness. It's not just about picking up the gun, because unless you change power, fundamentally, they'll just recapitulate itself, as George Orwell's Animal Farm shows, and, I think Marx himself constantly has talked about quite eloquently, and we can see historical events, and the same thing. The Bolshevik Revolution, pretty much reproduced the same sort of oppression and inequality, that it was supposed to overturn in the first place.
Because if you look at the Mormons, they internalize, good or bad, they internalize their community. If you look at Jewish Americans, if you look at the Jews throughout the world, they have internalized, consolidated their community. What I'm saying is that you have sub-national communities in the United States who have created consolidated communities, okay, who have benefited from their commonalities in terms of bad experiences and utilize these to create cohesion, a power structure within their community to take advantage and to reach for goals that benefit their communities. The pie is there for those, okay, who want to come together and take advantage of it, even though the capitalist society limits the amount of pie you get, And so if you look at the Jewish American community, they have incredible benefit from the electoral process because they're internalized, consolidated. Blacks, Chicanos, Indians don't get that benefit. Okay, in fact, when we get political representation in the political process, we actually lose out. And that's very evident in Obama, okay, in my opinion. So I'm saying that we have to understand that there are models that we can study, for example, like it or not, Zionism, Mormonism, the Amish, etc. We have to find those commonalities in infrastructure that empower their community. The Amish are a very small community. They have an incredible amount of elementary schools, junior high schools. They speak 3 languages, 2 of which they teach themselves. English only because they have to. They will not accept Social Security. It goes on and on and on. But they are internally consolidated. We have to study these communities and find out what is there that we can utilize in becoming subnational communities to get our piece of the pie or to reconstruct the pie, because the pie is very limited and we can get it. And that's why I'm saying that there's too much emphasis on that symbolism of brothers and sisters with the guns and so forth, And another comment I got is, for example, like the vehicle that we use to communicate this knowledge, you know, rapping, singing. Chris Rock with his comedy, incredible comedy, very accurate, very political. One of the things he talks about, he says, black folk don't need to worry about Al-Qaeda, they got to worry about Al-Cracker. Okay, because it talks about the brother that was dragged through the streets with a chain and his head coming off and all that in Texas. And very profound, very true. Everybody, ha 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 ha, next comedian. So even though it's truthful, it's not as effective in anchoring itself in the people's minds and hearts of that message. You understand what I'm saying?
Professor Austin, let me offer a counter argument. Because I think you're missing a huge point. And we just talked about it last month. You want to talk about a bloody revolution where hundreds of thousands of people laid down their lives willingly for decades is the Haitian Revolution. The only revolution in the history of the world where enslaved people fought their masters, threw off their chains, and established democracy. Not just in the Western Hemisphere, in the history of the world. And the idea that we could use the Mormons, the Jews, the Amish as a template for how we should move forward, I think is naive. Because they don't have, we don't have rather, the support and the acknowledgement of our humanity the same way they do. And they don't have the out-and-out racism and brutality and exploitation and denial of their rights that we do. If anything, the system is set up to protect the Mormons. If you look at the history of the Mormons, for example, they were far out in right field, coming out of the planet Jupiter with their ideology and their religion. I mean, they were some oddball people, and they were hammered, and they were persecuted and pushed around, and they fought, and they had their huge families, and they had their polygamy, and they moved out west to get away. And when it came time for a confrontation, all of a sudden Joseph Smith and then Brigham Young became what's the group? Anyway, they became part of the United States infrastructure, were co-opted into the system, and allowed to be who they were, provided they didn't continue to practice polygamy. They became Masons, just like the Founding Fathers. And they were allowed to become part of the infrastructure in the overall structure of the United States culture, provided that they mitigated their lifestyle, no more polygamy and no more of the militancy. We'll let you survive. Black folks and Indians and some other groups have never been allowed that luxury. So I don't think we can use them as a template.
So no, because we can't say that. I'm talking about in the manufacture of power. Now, power can be black. It can be black in the sense that it can be bad, white in the sense that it can be good, in the middle in the sense that it can go good or bad. What I'm saying, power, the manufacturing power. Now I know, if you study Zionism, you see some very dark tales. And if you study the Mormons, the same thing. Okay, and the indigenous people are the victims. As far as the Haitian Revolution being nothing to compare with, you have to study the Mexican Revolution, which to a great extent was very successful. You have to study Prepare, which was a revolution, true revolution that was very successful.
But they were slaves.
They were slaves. Yes, they were slaves.
They were enslaved.
They were enslaved.
They
were enslaved. Okay. Very much as enslaved as slaves as we commonly stereotypically think of. Yes.
Yeah, you talking about a feudal system, or you talking about a slave system?
We're talking about a slave system.
Slavery.
And that was when I gave the presentation on the Mexican Revolution. This idea that there was a civil war in Mexico. No, it wasn't. It was a slave revolt against the European masters and the descendants of their children and so forth. And it was, to a great extent, very, very successful for probably 4 or 5 decades. And then it began to deteriorate because eventually that capitalism, materialism, consumerism starts to seep into the system and take over people's minds and so forth. I'm not saying, I studied Zionism, I don't embrace Zionism, but I embrace the original manufacturing of power. Because if you study Zionism in the beginning, its purpose was to become a socialistic society, a communalistic society. That's what the kibbutz system is all about. That changed when they found out that they had all this incredible power. And they said, you know what, the hell with that? We're going to be capitalists, materialists, consumerists, and imperialists. Okay? And it's the same thing with these other religions, the Mormons and so forth and so forth. I'm not saying that they're good or bad. I'm saying that
no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that can they get template?
The idea, and I'm not saying that, you know what, there's no need for bloodshed. We're bleeding already and we don't see no blood. Look at we talked about that with the new Jim Crow. Okay, you weren't here for that presentation. The new Jim Crow and how she talks about this very quiet genocide against people of color. And I'm talking about genocide, okay, where people are alive, but you know what? They're dead. Okay, we're a dead people to a great extent. So I'm just saying that we have to understand what the struggle is. When we go to Iraq and when we go to Afghanistan and so forth, we're not fighting for democracy. We're not fighting for civil rights, human rights. We're fighting for international corporations, which are the organizational tools that are used by a small group of racists, sexists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I understand all those things, and I'm saying, but if you say, you know what, I ain't going. Send me to the jail where I'm going anyway, or where I came from. I ain't going. Fight yourself. That's more powerful than a gun. You understand? Yeah.
So, what do you think? Just after the election, whatever way it goes, whatever way, you know, Lumber wins, the other guy wins. So, what do you think that? What do you think?
Well,
what's going to happen?
Okay. Well, no. Thank you for your question. So, I'm going to speak, you know, in my limited sphere of what I do at Michigan State and the students that I work with. I'm going to connect my response back to the point about like what Karis wanted to call edutainment, whether it's effective or not, in terms of raising people's consciousness. I would, all due respect, respectfully disagree in the sense that I'm a product of this. I'm a child of the 80s, you know, 2 crackhead parents, okay, addicted to crack from 85. My father recovered, mother still out there since 85. We had nothing. I'm from New York, and all we had was this, and we used this as a vehicle. If it wasn't for the conscience raising that was caused by rap and hip hop, I would be, I'd probably be in jail, locked up, be one of these folks that Charlotte Alexander talks about, what have you. Now, mind you, it doesn't work for everybody, but for some of us, we did latch on, to the political messages within rap and hip hop, and it was transformative for many of us. Not just for the artists, but those of us that are doing like, standard stuff like teaching and stuff like I do, what have you. I would also point to like the Jenna 6 case. You all remember that when those young black men were thrown in jail, for a fist fighting over like to get down a noose, from a tree that should have been there in the first goddamn place. And they put those boys in jail, but they were liberated. They were liberated by other young people who converged on Jenna, and they were organized around, this culture. They used it on Facebook. They raised people's awareness about it. They created songs, videos, and stuff like that. So again, I don't want to overly romanticize it. So I do understand your point that that alone is not enough. But for some people, it can raise their consciousness. And the question is, if we are to embrace Malcolm X's strategy of by any means necessary, then we'll use all tools. We won't throw away any tools. We'll use the media, we'll use hip-hop, and if necessary, we will use violence if necessary, if we're true about it, and we'll be willing to die for it. So that's part of my thesis, that when it comes to black people being turned away from the polls, Florida style, we need to actually resist that right now, and not just simply wait for Eric Holder in the Justice Department doing something. What I'm about to say might sound controversial, and it's underreported. And I'm not saying that I agree with the political philosophy, because I don't. I think they're a bunch of racists and reactionaries. But one of the things that stopped that going on in 2008 was the new Black Panther Party in many places like Philadelphia actually walked around with unloaded shotguns in front of the polls. I dare you to turn our people away. We're willing to die to make sure that our people get the right to vote. Because this is not just about civil rights. This is about actually people having the right to the ballot, to practicing freedom. And that's what Malcolm X says in this ballot or the Bullet speech in 1964, that the ballot is about freedom, not just in terms of getting, integrated or whatever. This is about people being able to express themselves, what kind of society that they wanted to see, what kinds of things they want for the future, You know, bottom basic things, you know, like the right to walk in a safe community without being brutalized, you know, the right to, you know, not be sent off to war. All those things that he cataloged in those speeches, whatever. And he said deliberately the ballot or the bullet. He didn't say the ballot and the bullet. He said the ballot or the bullet. You know, that if we don't have access to the ballot, if we're not using all means necessary in order to make sure people get the ballot, then the bullet is the thing that's going to, that is the recourse. You know, people, there's something about human nature that wants to be free, you know? So I think that we can head it off at the pass by fighting like hell right now to challenge these people, calling them racist, and doing whatever we need to do, you know, to stop this, you know, this pretty well documented, well publicized effort to keep, you know, folks from the polls. And it's not just blacks, by the way, you know, it's also Latinos, Chicanos, you know.
There's a war on women, right?
Right, it's a war on women. They're, you know, they're even doing it to the Jewish community down in South Florida, you know, as they did in 2000. You know, like with elderly people that are in like these communities, you know, these retirement home communities that are deemed, you know, supporters of democratic, you know, politics, whatever, you know, well, they're trying to kick people off the elderly people off the rolls as well. So, I mean, I know that's probably not a neat answer, but in general, the spirit of my answer is that we have to fight like hell and not just sit back and wait for the Justice Department, you know, to engage this issue. You know, we got to inform people of their rights. That if somebody's turned away in the state of Michigan from a poll, you know, someone challenges them, you know, people need to know what their rights are. You know, how to challenge back, how to push back. You know, so the question is, how do we get people to understand that they have rights? That they don't just have to pack up and walk off.
Well, one other thing I want to talk about when we talk about the communication of artists, I think the converse is true too. We had Professor Griff here back in, I want to say January this year, and he talked about the deliberate dumbing down of hip hop and how all of a sudden groups that were conscious, KRS, BET Productions, PE, couldn't get record deals anymore. Poor Righteous Teachers. I mean, these guys went from gold and platinum albums to no record deal, and then you saw, and people are offended by these artists because they like them, so be it. But then you saw Lil Wayne, who to me is a catastrophe. You know, you see the Ludacris, you see, you know, the comedian rappers. You know, the more profane the better. Big booty, get high, cash bling. It's superficial, it's childish. They get the record deals. People who come along and still have conscious messages have to self-promote. They have to use the internet. They have to use Facebook, Twitter to get their message out. The music's still being made. But I don't think it's a coincidence that the big record companies all of a sudden just made this 180-degree turn.
You're onto something in terms of like the ways that these capitalistic industries, you know, have power because they control the means of production. They also control the means of cultural production, i.e. music and videos. One of the things that should give us some hope, though, as you alluded to, is that even from the beginning, there have always been like mainstream hip-hop, corporate hip-hop, and underground. Right. And with the explosion of new media technology, some of them I'm just using just now, that it's a lot more accessible. That a lot of people who, like, you get into a room with young people and you ask them how do you get your music, they're typically getting it offline. A lot of artists now are, believe it or not, less capitalistic driven. Like they're putting stuff up for free on their own websites. And young people are tapping into it. So they're circumventing. It's almost been, I don't want to overly romanticize this word about, you know, like a technological revolution, but they're undercutting the distributors that used to have a monopoly on the distribution of music right now. You know what I'm saying? So I think that, you know, hip hop, just like art or any other culture, is really broad and there are different tendencies within it. The question I have is that how can we tap into that stuff that's useful?
But the damage is being done in that when you have a referendum, it should be a no-brainer for anybody who ostensibly believes in democracy.
Oh, absolutely.
It should be a no-brainer that what they've done with this emergency manager is unconstitutional, immoral, and illegal.
Oh, absolutely.
But the idea that Pete and Joan, average suburban Caucasian family, can sit home at dinner and say, yeah, I want to vote to bring that into play, is buttressed in many cases by what they see on MTV, BET, when they see Lil Waynes of the world walking around. And I see it even among our own people. We see young men and women wearing their pants sagging, and we judge them to be less than we are.
I was in the Nation of Islam, and we just take a segment of Malcolm, you know, and we dwell on that. But his whole persona was about doing himself as a community life, a UMA. Just like the brother was saying, he tried to establish economical leverage so that African Americans can say, this is mine, or this is mine. We are a people that produce nothing. We have been conditioned to be exploited. So he tried to, you know, with his lectures and his speeches, and, you know, to corner people to raise their awareness of having your market in your community, take control of your community, and with freedom, justice, and equality. And everybody has that human right. So, you know, they lost that in the fight between just separating from the nation and establishing its own, and the hate that was established between Elijah Muhammad, you know, and so I think we lost that flavor of what he was all about.
Or did we simply lack the courage to do it? I mean, like, I live right down the street on Lenawi, right here in Lansing. Every time I jump on the highway to, go to Michigan State in East Lansing, you know, I see the fruits of the Malcolm X Foundation, you know, the Malcolm X, you know, street. I see it. But then right behind it is a closed factory. And then I started thinking, what lies behind it? You know, like, where do black people in the city of Lansing control anything? And it's not just Marxist, you know, socialist claptrap, you know, to say that you're absolutely right, that if we want to see some kind of change, that we have to control the economy of our community. Right. Well, why isn't that being done? Are there some kind of like major structural barriers from black people opening up dime stores or, you know, dollar stores, yes, or whatever, to open up, you know, something that will basically give somebody, you know, some kind of wage so they can like live a life of dignity. So I'm not sure if we lost the philosophy. I'm just questioning. I don't know for sure whether or not we simply have not had the courage or, you know, the sort of like ideological or political wherewithal to actually do it.
In Austin, if you talk to some old heads who grew up in Lansing, Miles been here long enough to know. This whole area, this 496 corridor here, was the black community. Yeah. And you had pharmacies, you had physicians, you had law offices, you had accountants, you had restaurants, bars. It was a self-contained black community. We were talking about that among us before you started to speak. I don't think it's ideological, and I don't think it's a lack of courage. I think there's a systemic effort being made to suppress the economy and the independence of black people. And Latinos and Indians. I think it's more than just a lack of wherewithal and a lack of vision. I think it's the lack of capital and the lack of access to low-interest loans and you know, I could go on and on. That's by design.
When a lot of Cubans came from Cuba, were driven out by Castro, they went to Florida, and they came as exiles. Very poor, started all over again. Now you have Cuban economy, you have Cubans oppressing Cubans. Okay? You still have an oppressive system. You just have a different master that looks like you. That has to be considered in your reconstruction of a future economy. Because I don't care if you look like me or don't look like me, if you're still oppressing me, I'm not interested. But I want to get back to the Ballot of the Bullet. I remember as a teenager listening to that lecture by Malcolm X. And then I remember some parts of reading it. And here was my general impression. Ballot or the Bullet. Beautiful title. First of all, especially at that time, we need the right to vote or we need to take to the streets, number one. Number two, we need to play the Democrats against the Republicans and not be strictly Republicans or stick to Democrats, but say, you know what, as a community, independent, we will choose who you're going to side with in this election depending upon what are you going to contribute to our society or our community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The last point I want to make to you, and I'd like to have you respond to this. My son made a comment to me, my older son, a couple years ago. He said, Dad, it's all about tension and release. Every 4 years, we had this builder. Okay, this Messiah is going to come here and just resolve all these issues. So we had this release. Okay, and then for the next 4 years, we had this tent. They didn't do it. Damn it, they didn't do it. I'm angry. I'm going to do something. I'm not going to vote for him. I'm going to vote for the other guy. He's the Messiah. And then you had this release. A couple months later, that tension starts. Good example again is Obama. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. So when are we going to realize that the electoral process is really a punching bag for our anger and not really an avenue to real change? Because we know now, especially now in the last few years, that the government is actually regulated by a more powerful entity that is beyond the concept of nation state.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I didn't get into very much, Sean, that kind of connects to where you're coming from, is I didn't talk about the Koch brothers and their efforts to fund things like the Mackinac think tank up there, whatever, right-wing think tank. That's behind a lot of what we're seeing, not just in Michigan, but also nationally as well. I didn't talk about how they're bankrolling politicians and all these different, so-called nonprofits, what have you. So yeah, you're absolutely right that you really have to start off with folks who hold support purse strings, making all this stuff possible. So yeah, absolutely. I'll just switch in my teacher mode. What I tell my students, when they have the same kind of like pressure release analysis, I kind of like turn it back to them. I'm like, well, what have you done within 4 years? Because all politics is local. What have you been doing on the ground? What have you been doing in the community, in your own communities or on the campus? In the meantime, to hold this man you fought so hard to get into the presidency, what have you done to hold him accountable? Did you really think that you're going to put someone in the highest, most powerful office in the world, in position in the world, and then stand back and just hope that, he's going to do the right thing? Why haven't you protest? Why did you support him on one day and then the next day? Why didn't you go and protest him to hold him accountable? And I'm speaking only about blacks in particular. I don't know about other communities, but blacks have done a really poor job of holding their elected officials accountable, whether it be local politicians, church officials, or the president of the United States. And if you try to criticize them for being corrupt and ineffective and selling out the corporations, they'll run you out. It happened to me. I was guest lecturing in a Black Studies class, and it was like everything rah 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 Obama. I said, well, let's look at his policies. Have you read his policies? What do you know about the drone attacks? What do you know about, the curtailment of civil liberties, I mean, really overwhelming stuff going on here, But he's cool, he's calm, he's collected, he's good looking, he's, slim, I mean, he can walk you down. Yeah, he has a little swag, and you just buy into that and not question this man about what he's actually doing, Well, he brought us health care. It's like, no, really he didn't. He talked about universal health care before, he got in office. And then he switched. He surrounded himself by these, excuse me, this is just me talking, my own personal perspective, but he surrounded himself by these corporate fascists like Larry Summers and incompetents like Timothy Geithner, people responsible for, the economic crisis in the first place. And he took them on as advisors. Why didn't you question him? And black people, I don't know what it is about black culture, we're just so happy to get our little token in office and not really kick him out of office. Locally.
Talk to Bruce Dixon, talk to Tab Smiley, talk to Cordell West, talk to many black intellectuals and political leaders who deigned to criticize Obama, and they were marginalized.
They'll get marginalized and ostracized.
Absolutely. In England, we talked about this the day he got elected. I was telling these guys, I say, hey man, you don't start running a marathon by sprinting 800 yards in the wrong direction. I said that. and so we've had brothers come into that steam room, we own our little caucuses, and look at us like they ready to shoot us. How dare you? The president's doing that. No, he's not. Right. No, he's not. Now, mind you, here's the dilemma. Do I choose the wolf or do I choose the fox? Because Obama's the fox. You let Romney get there, he's going to come up and take this chunk out your ass.
Or do you say there's another option that they haven't brought up that I'm going to resurrect?
The paradigm that we live within requires us to choose between the wolf or the fox. It does.
Yeah.
No, the rebellion does. The revolution says, you know what, Brother Malcolm.
That's a third. We don't live there. We don't live there. I'm not saying that we shouldn't. Don't get me wrong. But I'm saying where we live today.
Dennis, okay.
A wolf on the
Dennis,
fox.
I remember.
Which is what Malcolm
I
talked about.
remember, you might be too young about that. Okay, I mean as a compliment. I remember when Governor Wallace, ran for the presidency. And I remember John Castillo, who ended up with Michigan Civil Rights, John J. Castillo, was telling me the story because I was one that was, street student. But he was telling me, he said, they were telling me the story about the guys who were saying, man, vote for Wallace, vote for Wallace, vote for Wallace. And his brother was like, why are you telling black people to vote for Wallace? He said, we want to start the revolution. And in some ways, and I really believe, and I said that earlier when we were talking, if it hadn't been us having a black president, we might have had a lot of civil disobedience in the last couple of years. Okay, I think having a black president gave some slack to agony and misery in this country.
I'll disagree with well, yeah, we'll just wrap it up. Give yourself a round.